Right, that all sounds very formal. Hi, I'm Chris Rogers, University of Birmingham, UK. And I'm talking about some research that we're doing in a consortium in the UK called iBuild. It's a program of research. There are two consortia. The other consortium is represented here. This is ISIF, led by Brian Collins. Brian can't be at this particular event. So what we're doing is, with funding from the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council and the Economic and Social Sciences Research Council together, so bringing different disciplines together. We're looking at infrastructure interdependencies and novel business models. So the argument here is, well, the UK is going to be spending a vast amount on infrastructure, projected to be some £300 billion in 10 years on infrastructure systems. The argument then is, if we took a holistic view and understood infrastructure interdependencies properly, could we then come up with alternative business models that are attractive for investment? So we've heard about system of systems. Yes, sure, we've got a complex system of systems in cities, and interdependencies has been looked at quite seriously, but mostly in terms of resilience. What we're looking to do then is understand system models, and for that then we need models of all of the infrastructure systems and look at how they synthesize together to see where those opportunities might lie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a waste system, one of the systems in our cities, but I'm going to take a comparison then with a railway subsystem to see where the lessons might move from one to the other, and and to bring to mind then the fact that systems are emergent and necessarily then not tremendously well defined in all cases. So I could go to the hierarchy of waste. One advantage is that it does make things explicit. Another is that it starts to put silos into place, and silos are to be avoided. So what we need is a new approach that goes across the silos, both within our system of interest and then between the systems as a whole. So we have a waste hierarchy. Cities will have their own systems in place with very considerable sunk costs, with very considerable established behaviors. Essentially lock-in is where I'm coming from with all of this. So we have, we tend to lock things in. The civil engineers, we lock things in for a very long time, unless we make our systems nimble, adaptable, and so on. So what we essentially need to do then, if we are to intervene in a system, first of all, we need to understand the existing system fully and its context, and every city has its own unique context, so you need the two together. And then look at how you would synthesize the new with the existing, and therein lies the challenge. So I'm talking about new business models, novel business models. This is Birmingham that I'm now looking at. Birmingham, let me just make sure there's not a slide missing. Yeah, I thought there was. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a Birmingham case study. Before I get on to that, the issue of interdependencies and novel business models, are there likely to be then opportunities? What we've got here is a framework that was created by Morris and his colleagues that looked at a number of different types of business model and came up with this 6-component framework that looked then at a combination of variables. So you can see the list of prompts at the left-hand side. This is all about value, how it's realized, how it might be captured. But the interesting part is the central column, which talks about a combination of variables. And what we would do is then interpret that as a combination of infrastructure systems, leading to the possibility of being able to capture value. So now I get to Birmingham as an example. Birmingham, 500 billion tons of waste per annum. Sure, it adopts the waste hierarchy principles, part of which is looking to take waste to energy. As I suggested, happens in all cities, there is a large degree of sunk capital within the current system. There's an enormous incinerator that does the waste to energy thing, recycling plants, vehicles, and so on. So there's a whole infrastructure in place. But the whole waste thing is very much an emergent, evolving, and complex system. And that's the system that we need to understand. If we can go back to Birmingham and then say, well, now we want to change things, we want to intervene, we want to do things totally different. Okay, so if I were then to relate the waste system to the railway system, or in fact, if I were starting from scratch, I mean, let's assume I just simply start from scratch and I wanted to create a new system, then what I would do is design it. It might well be complex, of course, because you're trying to design something that does a lot of things, but that would be what we would perhaps term organized complexity. And you would start off with the design, you'd look at all of the systems that need to come together to, I don't know, manufacture one of those or whatever it is. And then you would progressively refine it. But you would start with that idea of organized complexity. What we have in the railway system is something that did duly emerge, but was forced, largely because of safety issues, was forced then to become very much an organized system. And so what we have done at the university in a past existence is looked at then reverse engineering from that system, the railway system, or part of the railway system, to understand or to elicit system data from a whole raft of railway standards. So you can go to the documents, pull out the system data, reverse engineering it, and create system models. The question I've now got is, can I do that with something that is perhaps less defined as in terms of a waste system? So what we did was we went to the documentation and we went through the usual sorts of process of looking at the hierarchy of policy documents, strategy documents, legislation, standards, master plans, then being very specific because we wanted to look at Birmingham's waste system, but those data, those procedures weren't published, so we then had to engage with the city itself to be able to pull out what we wanted. And this all started to get rather difficult because it wasn't a question of, well, let's start from scratch with something and design it, or we need to be totally transparent in the way our systems are operating. So that caused an issue. Now, let me just make sure I haven't gone too far. So what we then found when we started to try this reverse engineering of the waste system is that we could produce, we feel, an objective and repeatable system model. But the things that got in the way were, first of all, that the documentation is scattered, not well cross-referenced. That caused a problem because the documentation then wasn't coherent. It wasn't written up to be coherent. It existed in different ways. And it essentially wasn't system-orientated, so the language wasn't right. So it wasn't written in a way that you could then create the model from it, which meant that it becomes very difficult to extract the information we needed, the data elicitation. And the final point is then that there tended to be a disconnect between the higher level documents, the policy and strategy, this is what we're going to do, high level aims, and the operational procedures. And again, it's because the whole thing became emergent and some of the logic then exists in the people or the internal documents of the city council. So it was much more challenging to reverse engineer from the waste system. The model itself looks like this. What we're looking to do is to understand the entities. So this is just a breakdown of a system model. But if we've got something that is messy, it is emergent, it's not designed, it's far more difficult to populate this. And so what we had to do was then work with the city, but also then convince the city that what we had was something of value, because, hey, well, they dealt with waste and they know how to do with it, and what we might be doing is getting in the way of their system. So we had to develop trust. There are a number of different systems then that interact. Here are the interfaces with the system of systems. The waste management part exists somewhere on the here on the right-hand side, and then there are a whole raft of other systems within which it interacts. So we needed to understand that. We could then start to come up with our waste system of systems, system of subsystems, if you wish. So here are a number of functions that are in the rectangular boxes. You're not meant to read this particularly. And then the inputs and outputs to the system. So you can break the whole thing down and start to look at where how the system is put together. And then come up with the types of subsystem that we needed to look at. So waste management, recycling, the landfill, biological treatment system, the thermal treatment system, the waste collection system, and so on. We're partway through this process, but it demonstrates how we're looking to put this together. So we think we can do it. It's taken a lot more effort and time than we had expected. There are still questions to be asked. So if we're now trying to do this effectively, what is the level of granularity we need to go to deliver something that's effective, but is not then unwieldy to engage with? If we're going to make an impact from our research, then might we be feeding back into these systems to suggest how the policy and operational documents ought to be shaped in order that the modeling could be carried out? So that could be one of the outcomes of our work. What we've got then is typically a number of infrastructure system models that are either designed or have been shaped to be relatively closed systems. So what that might lead to is what we might call organized complexity. But we need then to engage with the disorganized complexity that are us lot, the individuals, and maybe society in general, that then interacts with those interfaces. So it's the emergent citizen behavior that then needs to be built into this, because that's an important interface with the waste system. We can have every system we like, but if it's abused because of the way people react to it or work with it, then it doesn't yield what it needs to do. So organized and disorganized complexity. And then we need to integrate that system with the other systems across the city to understand where the opportunities then might arise. So once one has a system of systems model and looks at where the interdependencies occur, then there can be opportunities. And then we need to get it into practice. So it's all very well as academics working out where these potential opportunities arise, but then the work with the infrastructure operators to change their system, to change the way that they're doing things, which could be horribly inconvenient to them because it's out of their comfort zone, arises. So there's a lot of work to do to bring these types of things into place. But ultimately, I talked about the funding coming from the two research councils in the UK, but it's very much driven by HM Treasury. They're looking to reduce greatly the cost of infrastructure system provision in the UK, and they think this is one way to do it. So iBuild is a consortium, but it's a partnership, and it's one that's growing, and we would be very welcome. We would welcome engagement if you wish to come and join us in some sort of way, or interact with us, or whatever. Interface with our systems. Okay. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Oh, okay, good. Good, thanks. Basically what I'm going to be reporting on is a project that Virginia Tech has been involved in with the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation on building and land use regulation for disaster risk reduction primarily in low and middle income countries. Now, I should make some effort to relate this to the topic of next generation infrastructure. And one point is that the next generation is not necessarily our next generation, that is the extension of rich and highly developed countries, but also the rest of the world. And their next generation may look somewhat different. The other thing is that we're talking about building and land use regulation, and clearly the infrastructure systems are those that connect and serve buildings, structures as opposed to infrastructure. And the relevance here is that the nature of the buildings influences the disposition and the character of the infrastructure service systems. Beyond that, land use is a very critical factor in determining the layout of infrastructure systems, the structure of urban conurbations, and these two building and land use regulation topics are fundamental to our developed world approach to disaster management and resilience. I would like to, after that introduction, credit my collaborators on this project. First, Thomas Moulier of the World Bank. Secondly, Jennifer Dune of the the University of Technology of Southern Switzerland, and Michael DeLint of the Ministry of Interior of Ontario. This team has brought together a wide range of experience in the anthropology of post-disaster reconstruction and the management of building regulatory systems. The other person I would like to acknowledge in this is our graduate research assistant from Virginia Tech, Nassim Fala. Now, what does it say? Do we have a slide? Yes. This one should say challenges, does it? Oh, good. The challenges, the obvious challenges that we're dealing with here are listed simply. Urbanization, we see a massive rate of urbanization, which has, of course, been accomplished largely in the so-called West, that is Europe and North America and Japan. But we see the pattern of rapid global urbanization continuing in Asia and particularly now in Africa, where there are large urban populations on the move. Large rural populations on the move. The next factor is globalization. And what we see there is that as a result of globalization, we're much more acutely aware of impacts on distant places, distant cities. The interdependency of trade and supply chain has made the impact of disaster and disaster loss in far-off places more immediate for all of us. The third point is climate change, which has served as an accelerator on all of the old traditional hazards. We had a relatively, I shouldn't say predictable, but a rate of earthquake occurrence and storm occurrence and flood occurrence with which we had become familiar. But now the hydrometeorological hazards are moving off the track. That is, we don't know exactly what to anticipate. And so we see a growing challenge in terms of everything from flooding, storms, sea level rise, and even forest fire. The other factor, which is, I think, evident from the earlier comment of the previous speaker, is a rising level of complexity. That is, that our cities and our systems are becoming more and more complex. I think we've seen reference to that in the presentations of several speakers this morning and later. And the idea of creating coordinated activity or maintaining some sense of coordination, management of interdependency is becoming a greater and greater challenge as complexity within and between systems grows. Now, one suggestion here is that we need to focus on a nervous system rather than simply bone and muscle. This may be somewhat reminiscent of an earlier talk this morning. But the next thing that we have to consider is what we've done for ourselves and what, in fact, has worked in the developed world to some extent. And that has been largely a regulatory approach. And historically, well, actually beginning even in ancient Rome and even going back to Hammurabi, there have been prescriptions about quality of construction. But more importantly, in the 19th century, in response to, well, I should say even earlier, 1666, the London Fire, for example, but also through the 19th century, response to specific urban disasters has led to a demand on the part of the public and commerce to reduce risk and to manage individual behaviors in terms of construction practice and location of construction for the public good. And following the massive urban conflagrations of the 19th century and the plagues and other safety and health impacts, we saw the evolution of a regulatory system. And this system is quite interesting in that it is a case of disaster leading to reform. That is in the teeth of disaster that we are capable of learning. And this may be an important lesson for us to bear also. That is that foresight has its limitations. The other thing that I would say is that the context of regulatory development has been in the general context of economic and social development. That is, there is a regulatory ecology in which regulation becomes possible. And that means the development of institutions like the rule of law, like professional education, like insurance, like a mortgage finance system, and so on, all of which are elements of what makes a regulatory approach feasible. This is an illustration of this disaster begetting reform process taken from an analysis of the New York City Building Code related to fire. And what you can see here quite clearly is that it is an event-driven phenomenon. And over time, in response to each particular disaster experience, there's been an adjustment, and the improvement of regulatory practice, more stringent requirements, something that earlier this morning was referred to as the handcuffs, I think, of regulation. And the result is that now we no longer expect or see urban conflagration in cities of the developed world. And so this is a case of regulatory success. And this is, in fact, what we have taken from these acute but distributed experiences as the basis for our approach to bigger events, natural hazards, for example, so that we now have flood regulation, and we have both for land use and for buildings, and we have earthquake regulation, both for land use and for buildings. And we've expanded the approach that developed from fires and epidemics to deal with other sorts of problems. Just very briefly here, I want to point out the difference, the sort of evidence of success. In the California case, we have two roughly comparable earthquakes in very roughly comparable areas in terms of gross population. And in the one case, there were a handful of fatalities in California, and in the other case, 30,000 fatalities in the case of Iran. Now, Iran has developed a building code in the past 30 years. However, the exposure here in BAM was determined by the unregulated construction of previous history. What we've seen, I mean, in light of this obvious difference between regulated and unregulated, is an attempt to implement regulatory regimes in low and middle income countries. Obstacles, primarily poverty. That is, you've got to be able to afford to build safely. Secondly, ignorance. That is, people haven't known what the nature of the hazard was and haven't known how to build better or where to build more safely. And thirdly, corruption. Unfortunately, rule of law is as important as physics in determining safe construction. The other factor that I would like to mention is this general anti-regulatory attitude that has developed in this country since the Washington Consensus and has spread around the world. Oh, no, maybe we shouldn't take credit. Maggie Thatcher may have had an important role in that as well. And since the 1980s, regulation has been a bad word. And regulation has been job-crushing and soul-destroying and generally unsavory. Well, in the case of disasters, natural disasters particularly, regulation is the only answer we've come up with. And the control of buildings and the control of urban development is essential. Which one have I got now?
Reconsideration.
That's it, yeah. And so what I'm suggesting now, and what we're suggesting in the publication that's coming from the World Bank in next month, is really a reconsideration of regulatory options and regulatory process, and an opening of innovation or innovative approaches to the topic of regulation. And what we are looking for there is what has proven to be successful, and what is necessary in terms of locally based practice, and what types of specific measures can be introduced and can be fostered in countries which don't have the benefit of a regulatory service. This is simply, the pyramid here is to illustrate stratification. That is, recognizing that low and middle income are not quite detailed enough. That is, we have many levels of capacity, both in terms of economic capacity, intellectual capacity, organizational capacity, and what is very important is the realization that no single template is going to fit in every situation, and it is seriously inappropriate to transfer the products of regulatory experience in developed countries directly to less developed countries. That is, there is an evolutionary process which we ourselves have gone through, which has to be in some sense replicated or at least appreciated in what we try to support and foster elsewhere. There are three basic parts of the program. One is the creation of the legal foundation for regulatory practice. The second is the development and maintenance of codes that are appropriate for the areas where they're to be applied. And the third is implementation. And implementation is the really critical missing link. That is, how do you in fact get a code once it's developed, once it's technically correct? How do you get it into practice? Now, we've also looked at, as I mentioned before, this question of regulatory ecology, and that is the environment in which a regulatory system can function and flourish. And just leave it to you, if you can, read the surrounding circles for what constitutes the regulatory ecology. And then very briefly, regulation and reconstruction. One of the primary opportunities for the implementation of regulatory practice is where everyone is aware of the failures and their consequences. And so even though the reconstruction process is a confusing and chaotic one, it is a primary opportunity in terms of awareness. The case studies I won't be mentioning, and then I'll simply say about this slide here that this is an example of a case from Colombia of a successful program of introducing the types of measures that we have been suggesting, and in the dramatic improvement of the quality of construction and the level of safety. This is a slide that simply illustrates the major components of the program that's being recommended through the World Bank as a part of the ISNGI initiative. And we can peruse that at another time. I want to say just two very brief things. One is about the role of universities in this topic. For one thing, this concept of the role of regulatory regimes must be incorporated in professional education, must be a basic part. We also must involve ourselves in research supporting this activity. I'll let you read the rest of this. And finally, I'll make one pitch for the topic of regulatory studies. And this is a topic which has not been particularly popular anywhere. It falls between most the prominent disciplines, but there are very important components that need to be dealt with in an integrated, multidisciplinary, if we say, approach. And this is simply a list of what those components might be. And I would suggest to NSF and to others that if they can see it in their hearts to realize that this is a part of resilience, a very significant work can be done in pulling this work together. Wonderful. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nima. I'm a PhD student in Old Dominion University, major in engineering management. My advisor is Dr. Georgi. And my research interest is in shale energies, more specifically risk governance and resiliency of these resources, these new resources. So at the earliest stage of my research, I've done a bibliometric study, and I found very interesting results, which I want to share with you guys. All right, so today I'm gonna talk about introduction to these resources, technical and environmental aspects, analyzing the body of knowledge, co-citation analysis, and conclusion. So if you're not aware of these resources because they're new, generally we can classify our resources into renewables like solar, wind, hydropower, and non-renewables like natural gas, coal, petroleum, and nuclear. But there are unconventional energies, which are pretty new, less than 1 decade, like shale gas, shale oil, gas hydrates, coal bed methane, and tight gas sand. And they are very controversial, so many environmental impacts, and requires a new mindset and a regulation process. So these unconventional resources is classified to different types. The most important one, which has biggest share, is this shale gas and shale oil. And my focus of my research is on these resources. So if I want to simplify the process, we can classify the process of extraction of these resources to providing the vertical drilling, and then horizontal drilling, and then blasting about 2 miles under the ground, and then pumping water, sand, and some chemicals, which are actually toxic chemicals, with high pressure under the ground for fracking this shale layer and then extracting either oil or gas. Oops. So there are 3 main driving factors for developing these resources. The main driving factor is development of 2 main technologies, which is fracking and horizontal drilling. Horizontal drilling helps us to do extraction in different direction, and fracking helps us to extract as much as possible from oil and gas. And by help of these resources, the United States is currently one of the biggest natural gas producer in the world, and one of the biggest oil producer. And the other thing is these resources are very abundant all over the world, as you can see in this map. China, Mexico, Canada, Argentina has considerable reserves. And there are many places that still didn't explore to see if they have these reserves or not. And another driving factor could be considered the Fukushima nuclear accident, which accelerate the shift of shutting down the nuclear energies and shift to natural gas, because renewables are not mature enough in terms of being competitive in the market and produce enough energy for us. So as you can see, they're widespread all over the United States. Maybe you can find it under your backyard. And I would say in the 20th century, for about a century, we have found these resources, but the technologies was not competitive and mature enough to produce these resources economically feasible. And but after 2006, they started to produce these resources very fast. And in the year 2012, average of 25.7 billion cubic feet per day was produced natural gas, which was about 40% of United States natural gas production. But as you can see, when we start drilling, we have to drill a lot, so it has so many environmental impacts on the health of people living in this close to this area. And as you can see in this picture, some of these wells are very close to residential areas. And here you can see a geographical location in Texas, which in the year 1997, we didn't have so many wells, mainly vertical wells, but in the 2009, thousands of these horizontal wells was drilled, and so many people was concerned about this environmental impact. So it has been approved that when we do fracking, this water and sand and also the methane, which later on would be produced, can leak to water, underground water resources. It can also emit to the to climate change and cause climate change, and also might cause earthquakes. But at the same time, it has a very positive impact on the economy and energy security, and also produce jobs. So we are facing a polarized view. Some people are saying that we have to ban these resources, and some people are saying that these innovation and these resources are very important for United States in terms of producing job and energy security. But as an academician, the most important thing for me was analyzing the body of knowledge. And also it's very important for regulation process, because when we want to say, okay, how it affects to the environment, we have to do some research and exactly see how it affects. Let me say an example. For example, in terms of climate change, for years, regulators and policymakers used to say that these resources are okay. It has leakage to underground water. It contaminates, underground water, which has bad effect for the people living near to these wells. But from climate change point of view, it's cleaner and it's better. So we can consider it as a bridge fuel to the time that renewables are mature enough to produce enough energy. But recent research conducted in Cornell University, and they analyzed the footprint of emission from the starting point to the from cradle to the grave. And they realized that even this shale gas has higher climate change impact than coal and oil, because methane has 30 times more greenhouse gas effect. And if we sum the amount of emission has done at the well, and also the carbon dioxide, we understand that these resources is even dirtier than coal. So from research point of view, I was trying to understand how this body of knowledge is growing for supporting the policymakers in this area, because even policymakers are confused. A considerable group of researchers are saying that we have to ban it. Some people are saying that it's very important. We have to wait until these technologies become mature enough. So here I try to model the knowledge domain. As you can see here, the publication in this area in ISNGI journals, which are the most credible journals, is started from 1996, and in the year 2009, it boomed to around 600 papers per year. And so I conducted a bibliometric method. I have a few minutes, so I go fast through methodology. Basically, this bibliometric method is started in 1969, and in this area, we adopt some statistical and mathematical method for analyzing the body of knowledge. Two main analysis is citation analysis and co-citation analysis. In citation analysis, the main rationale is the highly cited papers are the one which has a higher impact on the body of knowledge. And co-citation analysis, we have different approach. So here we analyze the simultaneous citation of a later paper to earlier references. So if two references simultaneously cited by a later paper, those two papers has a semantic relation. And when it goes to the higher frequency, we can understand the intellectual structure of the body of knowledge. So in order to gather the publications, we have to use some keywords. So I did different keywords like shale gas, shale oil fracking, and hydraulic fracking, and unconventional energies. in this area, and 2,489 publications was collected, and we downloaded the full record of these publications. We searched on the topic field, which is a title, abstract, and keywords. And with the help of a software tool, which is called Cytospace, we mapped different aspects of this body of knowledge. Here is the collaboration of this research has been done in this area. As you can see, United States is the dominant country, most productive one in terms of publication, with 1,090 papers, followed by China with 351. Canada 130, Australia 96, and England 92. But the most interesting thing in this map is China has a completely distinguished position in the map in terms of collaboration, which means later on for people in the market that we have to wait for Chinese company to produce their own technology and compete in the market. So right now, some companies are saying we have to transfer the technology to China. They're saying that, okay, because their technology is not environmental friendly, but maybe the main purpose would be preventing for capturing the market. So what are the main research institutes in this area? Texas Austin is the University of Texas Austin is the biggest university in this area. And Penn State University, Colorado School of Mines, Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and Stanford, and Texas A&M University. As you can see, Texas University is very active. And one more. Okay, so comparing China and the United States, China is more focused into a few main universities. So basically, I have to skip these parts and the tool we use. So basically, this is the map of this body of knowledge, the co-citation map. As you can see, we have 3 clusters. So I think I have to skip the later slides, just generally describe here. So as you can see, in the first cluster, we have dominancy of blue color, which shows the actually this the research has been done in this cluster. It was the earliest stage, like around 70s, 80s, and 90s. The second cluster emerged in the year 2000, 2005, and continues to 2014. And the last cluster is the most compact one, which emerged only 4 years ago. Reviewing the main papers of these clusters reveals that in the first cluster, researchers started focusing on shale oil and main engineering aspect of it. In the second cluster, the researchers are main focused on shale gas and the geological aspect of it. And the last emerged cluster is their environmental impact. But the most interesting thing in this map is there is a considerable lack of connection between the third cluster and the 2 first cluster, which means that the researchers which have focused on the environmental impact has considerable lack of knowledge bases of geological and engineering aspect of these technologies. For example, one of the latest publication has published from MIT. They just sent the questionnaire to expert and asking, okay, which risk has higher risk for the people, and there's no expert to understand all different aspects of engineering and geology, and we are facing, even geologists are facing lack of knowledge. So the next, actually the suggestion for future research is multidisciplinary approach to trying to provide a framework which use the basic knowledge which exists in geology and engineering for providing a risk analysis framework. Thank you very much.
My question actually concerns the presentation about land use and the emergence of regulatory practice. You have mentioned that basically the emergence of building codes has been event-driven in the US. And something that is event-driven will necessarily be subject to contingency. So, because the events are situated in time and are not easily replicable. So they have progressively grown, and therefore transplanting them to other places would be difficult and would lead to some side effects, maybe. So, and also, for example, being from Africa, African countries cannot afford to wait for the span of 200 years that it took to emerge these things in the US, for example. So maybe very briefly, what can be done to accelerate or fertilize this, this emergence of regulatory frameworks, not in 100 or 30 years, but so do you have insights on how to accelerate?
Let me stop you there. Do we have one or two more questions from the audience? Going once, twice. All right, that's the only one. Fred, you have all the allotted time then.
Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The whole purpose of this exercise at the bank is, in fact, to accelerate that process. And what we have witnessed historically is the gradual, as you say, several hundred-year evolution of practice. There are interesting models. What we have seen is where there's been an attempt to transfer the products of regulatory process directly to developing countries. There is a tremendous disconnect. For one thing, the materials are different, the practices are different, the capacities are different. Very often, the solutions from developed countries cannot be afforded in developing countries. And the result is that the transfer fails entirely. And we have many, many examples of that. What we see now as a very promising approach is something that has begun in places like Nepal and Jamaica and eventually Bangladesh. And that is a borrowing of the foundation of codes from developed countries, but with a very strong processing of the materials and the technical issues, ensuring that local practice and local materials are adequately represented, ensuring that the social evaluations, risk acceptance and so on, are calibrated for the society in which the code is to be applied. And in the case of Jamaica, they have adopted, in principle, not in practice yet, the ICC, which is the typical code here in the US. And they have created a special adaptation document which adjusts that historically derived document to fit the current reality of Jamaica. And what's important also there is that the ICC is a very large organization capable of maintaining a triennial updating and tracking technology development and modifying principles within the code in a way that a smaller, poorer country couldn't hope to. And so this sort of symbiotic relationship is something that we see as a positive possibility. Most important thing being adequate representation and participation at the local level in low and middle income countries.
I thank the panelists, I thank the audience for your participation.